either raise your hand high or you feel welcome to sit in the front row, and I can see you a little better either way. I can see you folks okay for the moment. Ron, do you want to hand the candy around? I'd say we could hand it to the crowd too if you all want some chocolate. Feel free. And Julia, we're recording.
You're recording, the mics are hot.
Okay, thank you. I will call this meeting to order of the Clatsop County Comprehensive Plan Update Countywide Citizen Advisory Committee. My name is Andy Davis. I am the chair of the Countywide Citizen Advisory Committee. I'd like to go around the table and do introductions for the people who are here from our various committees. And also after that, I might ask for the public to just briefly introduce yourselves so that we know who's in the room. Again, my name is Andy Davis. I live in Astoria. I was appointed by the commissioners, presumably because I have some involvement in other things in the county, like the budget, and also I'm a data analyst for Greater Oregon Behavioral Health, so maybe I can make sense of the numbers that we're confronted with. Ron, I might start with you.
Ron Weber, Jewel Elsie area.
One thing that they just told me was if you cannot hear your voice coming through the speakers, you need to speak more directly into the mic.
Thank you, Julie.
Jim Alegria, the Countywide Advisory Committee.
Ron, we might come back to you.
Hello.
Julia Decker, Clatsop County Planning Department.
Cheryl Johnson, Northeast CAC, and then liaison from the Northeast CAC to the Countywide CAC.
Todd Lundy, Southwest Coastal CAC, and also this one.
Robert Strickland, Clatsop Plains, CAC, and also County Planning Commission with this guy who just walked in.
Ron.
And Ron Weber again from Jewel Elsie.
Thank you. And I might start over here. Sir, do you mind introducing yourself just briefly?
I'm Will Kaplinger. I'm Land Use Administrator for Greenwood Resources.
Thank you.
Christopher Art, I'm on the County Planning Commission.
I'm Angelique from the Jewel.
Great, thank you. Welcome back, Misty.
Tim Shields, Citizen Lumber.
Tim.
Ashley Lutoro, are you Department of Forestry?
Yeah, I work for Hampton Forests.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. So I want to briefly go over the agenda. I don't know if everyone in the audience has been able to see it. We do have a portion of the agenda today that is left over from last discussion we had, which was about agriculture. There were significant questions that I think we haven't had time to discuss on that topic, so we wanted to set time aside for that. It is possible that we'll get to forestry today. That is certainly on our agenda, but it's also possible that'll be pushed back a little bit just depending on how the other conversations go. I will say that in general, so we've got a forestry tour that happened today.
And we have marvelous presence from forestry. It'd be a shame to have them cool their heels.
Yes, I agree. And I would also say we've got another forestry workshop coming up on Monday. I fully anticipate our next full meeting will be entirely about forestry. So don't get the impression we're giving short shrift to the topic. We're just dealing with other things as they come to us. Okay, I would like to, do we have the meeting summary in front of us? Julia, do you have a copy of it? Or do other folks, have they had time to review the summary from last meeting for accuracy? I know Gail sent it out by email, which is where I've reviewed it. Any comments or additions, corrections that folks have about last meeting? Jim, you can come to the table, sure. Since you guys just arrived and you missed introductions, I'm asking for comments or corrections from the summary of last meeting, if you have them. I might ask you two also to introduce yourselves to the group so that everyone, especially in the crowd, knows who you are and who you represent on this committee.
Okay, I'm Jim Coughlin, and I'm from
Jim, we were instructed to speak into the mic.
Jim Coughlin. I'm with the Lewis and Clark area.
Thank you.
I'm Pat Corcoran with the Countywide Committee, and I have no changes to the minutes.
Okay. Any other changes, suggestions?
Minutes look good to me.
Without objection, I will approve the minutes. Okay, and then the next item on our agenda is reports out from the planning area liaisons. So the folks who have introduced themselves from our subregions, I might just go around the table and since you're just getting settled in here, Jim, I might start on this side of the table, which I think is Cheryl.
I'm on the Pleasant Plains one. And these all start to blur together. You know, on the topic of agriculture, you know, I really, I think it's still just a pondering process. You know, I don't think there's anything that I'm being remiss about not passing along from the Pleasant Plains people. It's just thinking about, there's not much going on. There are thoughts about how can we accommodate young people who can't afford big properties? Can you still get EFU protections? You know, when you have a little parcel, you know, can that be brought down to 5 10-acre pieces? You know, so I think that's kind of the biggest sense of Pleasant Plains is so heavily just focused on home building west of 101 and swampland on the east, and I think it's all important. But not just from a narrow view of ag, especially not in, gee, does this qualify as ag? It depended on how much money you make. It's just all part of the natural environment down there. And I think ag plays an important part of being not driven by building houses, or that it's not ag if you don't make X dollars while doing it. You know, there's just like there's a disconnect between monetizing any activity and quality of life. Mm-hmm. And I will pass on to Todd.
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Robert.
I'm Todd Lundy, and I represent Southwest CAC, Southwest Coastal CAC. We met on November 13th, and there were 3 members present. 2 members were out of state. One was in the air on his way back home. We passed 3 resolutions regarding agriculture and tabled several others, which we will deal with in our December meeting. The 3 that we passed were as follows. Agricultural land should be preserved for the valuable role it plays in providing food and health needs for all Oregonians, and for the value that and then it says forest and open spaces provide to environment and quality of life. These are kind of restatements of what's in the plan already, right? Secondly, counties should avoid converting agricultural land into rural from rural to urban uses or other non-farm uses through the use of EFU, exclusive farm zones, limitations on non-farm uses, minimum lot sizes, and dwelling approval standards. The third one was Clatsop County is unique in Oregon. Planning should encourage agriculture, which is regenerative. The goal is to promote the scale and type of farms which are suitable in this type of soil and climate conditions. Those three were approved. A number of others were not, and I'll get those to you next time.
Thank you, Todd.
Cheryl Johnson, Northeast CAC. We met 2 weeks ago on Thursday, and I think three of our 5 people had attended the workshop on Forest Practices Act. So we briefly reviewed that. A number of people had a number of concerns, but Gail was already aware of them, so we didn't belabor that. We had a number of guests. We had 7 guests, and if I did my count correctly, 5 of the 7 guests were either employees of Hampton Logging or family of Hampton Logging. So Hampton was well represented, and then there were 2 others that are also tangentially related to logging. So Hampton Industries was well represented, and then those folks also are residents of Northeast Clatsop County. We're at goal 4, forestry, so our discussion 2 weeks ago was on goal 4. We spent quite a bit of time, because we had new people in the audience, we spent a lot of time sort of talking about what the goal of the CAC is. So they asked great questions, and I think it was a real nice community involvement, almost a teaching situation. So they were able to understand that the role of the Citizen Advisory Council is actually just to advise the county that we were not going to be making new rules.
Cheryl, could you just restate for the audience what goal 4 is?
Yeah, goal 4 is forestry.
Thank you.
Yeah. We also talked about what it means to update this plan, and so it was interesting for them to learn that this body was not just about making rules and regulations for forestry, but that there are actually 19 goals, and that forestry is one of them. So it was very interactive, lots of questions and answers. I thought it was a great discussion. One of the topics that we talked about in the Forestry Goal 4 was Forest Practices Act, and because there were a number of people that were knowledgeable in the audience, that was a good discussion. And in the end, I invited them to attend this meeting, explaining to them that we were just the Northeast CAC, but that this group is one from everybody across the county, and at least one of the folks from Hampton that was at the Northeast CAC the last 2 weeks ago is here today. I attended the field trip this morning, which was dynamite. A number of other people at the table did also. Do you want me to say a few words on that, Andy, or do you want that as a different topic, or?
Actually, let's go through the liaison reports, and then maybe we'll come back to that particular one.
Perfect.
Especially if we could preface goal 4 discussion today with some of that information, that might be helpful.
Okay. And we will meet again in, I think we're at December 8th. And we did not conclude our discussion on forestry, so we will continue forestry and probably, I would guess in December, conclude our discussion of forestry.
Thank you. I think, Ron, you're the next liaison.
Ron Weber, Jewel. We did forest also. And had the biggest turnout ever at Jewel High School. And we have the 4 new members to our group: Brian Lippy, Brady Gritt, Diane Jetty, and Virginia Edwards. And a few of the folks from Hampton were there too. Not getting into the forest part, what was interesting, a lot of it does overlap with what ag is. And Brady Gert brought a lot of that to home. The laws, the laws are there for the farmer to farm. They just need to use them with the best management practices. And he's very, very good at that. And of course, a lot of this was over forest. And then back again, forest and ag, if you do the short rotation, you affect the soil. So you need to watch that. And if you simplify the system, that was a good one. You simplify the system, you end up with a dust bowl. So that was classic. Public input. Oh. And if you manage, Brady was really good at that. Using the 80-20 principle, if you manage the 80%, you're not taking, the top 20 is not going to take, is the one that's going to take care of itself. So you have to manage it all instead of just one portion of that, of your lands. And most of my stuff was over forest. And people just actively need to manage their own, that was really good. I was thinking about that yesterday. People just need to actively manage their own land. And in the whole, it will take care of the whole, if you can pull that off. Just keep managing your own land best you can. And we're going to have another meeting in December also and finish up on forest. That's it.
Thank you, Ron. Jim, do you want to?
Well, our meeting was held the night of the final baseball playoffs. So we ended up with a short group, but we did, in fact, have enough there to carry on. I think the most important thing that came out of our last meeting, and interesting as well, was Jim Nikas, who is a local developer, so to speak, I guess, came up with some interesting ideas about what might be done to reduce lot sizes so that smaller homes could be built in a more dense situation, so that the price of homes would come down compared to what the average home, newly built home, is selling for in the county. So the group spoke about that with county employees and found that some of the items that he was suggesting would more than likely have to be dealt with at the state level, and possibly through writing new legislation to allow for smaller lot sizes than even the 2-acre. There was a lot of things that I knew nothing about, but that our county staff was very capable of keeping us apprised of. So I'm suspecting that we'll continue talking about that. That took into account both forest land and agricultural land. And that's about as far as we dealt this last meeting.
Was it clear that, was he advocating for like two-acre house residential parcels in forest land?
Actually, as I recall, it was even smaller than 1-acre plots. Taking a 5-acre plot and breaking it down into the smallest possible for building small homes.
It's like 5,000 foot, so like 10 per acre.
Is that kind of what we touched on?
Well, the committee was looking at different ideas of things that might work. It was kind of a freewheeling discussion.
It was very freewheeling, yes.
Because I went to extending services to developments like that, I imagine.
Those were some of the things that we discussed.
You obviously can't put septic systems on small lots and those kind of things, but in the right situations, it would be possible to at least look at those as a way to go.
Did he have a handle on like municipal water? Is there a thought there? I think.
Well, we did discuss municipal water, but there are, at least in the area that I'm living in, we do have a municipal water capability, but it's limited as it is countywide. There's lots of issues, but we need to find some way to make homes available to people that aren't able to handle $200,000 plus homes.
I see something in the minutes about discussion of annexing like Jeffers Gardens or Miles Crossing area or conversation about to that effect. Sorry. I thought I saw in the review of the minutes, there was conversation about the Jeffers Gardens and Miles Crossing area and their relationship to the city.
We did discuss it. I don't know that we came to any great and wonderful conclusions, but there are a number of things in the Miles Crossing area that in the 20-year plan should definitely be looked at,
It kind
planned
of
for.
It kind of caught my eye because I think in the history, weren't they pretty adamant about not being in the city at the time, like at 1980 and some other places? In 1980 when the.
Oh, 1980, I don't know. I mean, at this last meeting, no. Nobody was suggesting the city of Astoria take it in.
Thank you.
It's not part of this.
The only thing they're annexing now is the sewage. Taking it.
In the past, in the Miles Crossing area, has it been simultaneously okay by the county to do both pig farming and residential development?
Pigs haven't complained.
I'm thinking of, did the Hesses plan, 100 homes being developed on?
Well, the Hesses haven't come to any of our meetings, so I can't answer that.
Okay. But I thought maybe some of the institutional knowledge about that area, it seemed like we can, kind of like Oregon, be able to imagine combinations of events happening without thinking very deeply into them.
It seems to me that developing high-density housing distant from downtown Astoria, where people work, would be costly in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of transportation, and a better approach would be to increase the density in our urban area, if you call it an urban area, anyway, our town, rather than out in the outlying areas. And the whole purpose of what we're doing here is to preserve farmland and timberland. I mean, that was what Senate Bill 100 was about. And so it seems to me that's counter to what our principal objective is.
Thank you, Todd. Any more commentary about the liaison groups? Or are we ready to move on to, we've got some time we could possibly reclaim for discussion of ag land, if that's okay with folks?
Wondered if we might switch the agenda around a little bit to accommodate all the nice people who came for forestry. I had a little bit of sense that perhaps today is viewed as a more productive time on forestry than Monday might be, on the idea that there may be a presentation of talking points more on that, and this might be more interacting with people who are directly involved. And it wouldn't change the total time, it would just mean they weren't cooling their heels. And I know at least 4 people out here are directly involved in forestry. The predominance of the audience.
So I guess my take as your chair is that's a group decision. I welcome, say, a motion to amend the agenda, and then we can vote on it as a group and see if we want to move that around or not.
I move that we adjust the agenda, switching goal 4 and goal 3 discussions for the purpose of accommodating the people in the audience who have come out this evening.
Sure.
So when will we actually continue and finish up goal 3 then?
Probably over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. You know, that it is not totally linear, that we're always able to come back to things. It's not necessarily a linear process.
Do I hear a second for the motion?
I'm not seconding, I'm asking, are you proposing that we then not deal with goal 3 in this meeting, or
Nope.
is this just a temporary?
This was an accommodation of the
Yeah,
people
right.
who have come to talk about forestry, and it's so rare to pull people out of the public into these esoteric meetings.
May I ask the people who are in forestry whether they would be wanting to do this and leave? Or do you want it, it doesn't matter?
Doesn't matter, I plan for the possibility of having them twice.
Then I would counter, Robert, that we should just stick with the agenda as it's prescribed.
I'm wondering if finishing up goal 3 agriculture would be a long discussion. I have one comment on it, and that's all.
Okay.
I don't know where others are, but we may be able to deal with agriculture in a short period of time and then move on, but I can't speak for you all.
Okay. I'm reading the group at the moment that the motion is dying for lack of a second. Thank you for your patience. We will try to get through agriculture in the most expeditious way we can and cover all the bases that people want to cover. I will say, I might ask, this meeting, I got some feedback after the last meeting. It was an interesting hybrid meeting, and we had lots of public comments, which we welcome. But also some people were feeling like they didn't get called on, or they weren't able to speak up when they wanted to. So I might just ask the group that try to get recognition from myself so that I can make sure that people who get their hands up or things like that, either at the table or in the audience, can speak their mind, and that we all get time. Okay? Is that agreeable to everybody?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let's continue with goal 3. I had a few items that I wanted to pick up from the offered agenda last time that we didn't really get to because we ended up discussing different topics, really. I think one of them is, and this ties in with a lot of the reports from the liaison groups, this balance of demand for affordable housing with requirements for preservation and our desire to keep farmland as farmland. This is going to very much overlap, I think, with forestry discussion as well. But specific to agriculture land, are there any thoughts from the group about how we approach that? We've got some discussion coming out of the liaison groups about going for preservation, or even other discussion about maybe novel housing ideas. What's the sense of the group here about that topic?
Anytime somebody is saying that.
Robert,
that
I want to start with making good habits here. I'll recognize you
Oh,
to
I
speak.
thought you had paused long enough. I thought you were ready for someone to speak.
Go for it.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
When there is a supposition that using ag land for housing development is going to reduce the cost of housing, I would love that being more rigorously questioned. That I don't see a trickle-down process of developers going and getting the cheapest land and that yielding affordable housing. I see developers talking about a $250,000 being affordable. You know, that I think this also came up with B&B, the rental housing, that it's different markets on short-term rentals and what I would call wage slave tenements. You know, that you're not going to cure the wage slave tenements by turning ag land into Levittown.
Thank you. Todd?
Andy, just in response to your question, our group is pretty clearly on the side of preserving agricultural land and reducing the amount of growth in urban growth boundaries. Of some of the two things from our discussion that we'll be acting on includes those kind of issues. Planning, well, one is control of the expansion of urban growth boundaries, for example, expansion into low-quality agricultural and forest land, or greater use of multi-story building. So that we're discussing these possibilities, but I think the tendency is to stay away from urban growth boundary expansion unless it's absolutely imperative, and I think that's what the whole program is about anyway.
Okay, thank you, Todd. Jim?
Now, I also challenge the idea about using agricultural lands for development, simply because you can look at 49 other states to see some of the repercussions of that. Matter of fact, you can look in Washington. In the early 80s, I lived in Seattle, and the Renton area, that was prime agricultural land. And you won't find agricultural land there anymore because, quite frankly, it is cheaper to build. It's easier to build. There's no doubt about it. And so that consequently is where the development went. And Oregon is a unique in terms of having an urban growth boundary. And it's not saying that the urban growth boundary can't change. It should change, but in a very planned way and in a planned direction that makes the most sense from an infrastructure perspective. So yet I understand that we're in a housing crunch where this isn't really a housing discussion. I have some comments on that, but that may be best for another time.
Okay, thank you.
They're kind of overlapping topics. You don't have ag lands in isolation.
So I've got Ron and then Cheryl.
Good point. Where I live, we just need to use what we got. There are lots that size, and there's infrastructure in place, except that I'm sitting there thinking, we need to figure out how to reconstruct the houses that are there and/or replace them with something that's there, because it's already zoned for what it is, perfectly.
What area are you?
Off 103,
Yes.
acres back in the Urbia, and so, but to make them livable, figure out how to finance them. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah.
To make it affordable, there you go, affordable financing to reconstruct what is there, weatherize them, do what you got to do to make them livable again in that area. Because these were that whole area. I mean, my house was the first stick home built there in a long time.
Well, like 70 years ago, you're talking about 48, or you're talking about 23?
63,
Okay.
65, 1965, 70. But, so they're wore out. Forget where I was going with that. Oh, stick homes. There are no stick homes
So to figure out how to get in there and help these people with that. I've pondered that too many times, on their incomes. People with incomes can, and then they still work out there. They still work out there and live out there, but their housing is not that good. And then you could actually bring more people in to do the jobs, to create the jobs, to work at the school, wherever. And this was the same conversation we had last time. The deputy sheriff's still looking for a place for his five-family family, and it's not there. So, that's my thought.
Thank you, Ron. Cheryl, you had, and then Chris, I saw you in the audience, so we'll get to you after Cheryl.
Northeast CAC, 2 of the 5 folks on our CAC are farming, and there's a lot of farmland out there, so this was an important topic for us, and we are 100% in support of not taking land out of agriculture for anything else, but also very much aware of this eternal conversation and need for affordable housing. And one of the very first meetings that we had, a guy who was fairly new to the community came and talked to us. He had access to one parcel, and I don't know exactly what it was zoned, but it was RA, and so he was a 5 or 10. And he said, if this were zoned differently, I could divide this into 4 pieces of property, and I could build 4 very affordable houses. He said to us, I looked in Northeast Clatsop County in the last couple of months, and there is 1 house in the entire area that's available at a price below $300,000. So sort of, I think the consensus is that the part that is residential, we do not want to take anything out of agriculture and move it into residential, but that which is rural residential, and I'm sure my vocabulary here is not right, but that are large parcels could remain residential, but could become smaller parcels in order to possibly make that more affordable. And then, of course, the other side of that is, and we brought up this discussion too, then that means that people who are, for us, living in rural Napa, if they're working, whatever, at the cannery in Astoria, they have to get to work, so that affects transportation, and then there has to be, water or, sewer and those services. So then they have to be, so we didn't have any magic bullet for it there.
Yeah.
Is there antipathy toward especially small houses, like 250-foot dwelling units, under 300 square foot dwelling units, or is that just beyond the acceptability of people of Clatsop County? When we talk about affordable housing, you can take 30% of somebody's income and most likely build something for that amount of money. We were just very careful in our housing study not to have an architect on board.
Was that a question for Cheryl, Robert, or a broad one for other groups?
That was a broad one to all. I often think that people can't imagine people living in a 250-foot space, and yet can talk about something being affordable, but they can't imagine 30% of $20,000 for your housing costs. And I don't know, I think part of the disconnect is you have people finding the solutions who haven't the math ability to perform those equations.
Yeah.
And it's not for lack of funding. In the past, like local credit unions within house were able to give X money, and I don't think the answer is always home ownership. That could be a community deal, but it's more, do we want rabbit warrens as our solution? Or do we need to ghettoize those and get them out of the power lines next to the free are we to have affordable housing in our neighborhoods?
Pat, I'll come back to you. Chris, you had your hand up a moment ago.
Yeah, kind of going back to the idea of whether it's reasonable to think about using agricultural land as being subdivided for housing. I just wonder how much knowledge the county has in terms of what's happening with small farms in our county. Are they on the upswing where there's more acreage being put back into use? I know from being on the Soil Conservation Board, I know that some farms have been reactivated, ones that were essentially abandoned, and now people have come here and moved in and made them working farms again, and they've been successful. So we hear about what's the inventory of buildable lots for housing, we should do what's the inventory of agricultural land, and where is it located, and does it meet the expectations of future growth in ag for our county, which I think is
Sure.
has a big future to, it's not necessarily something going away. I think it's coming on stronger to have small farms. And there's a number of sources you can consult, and one of them is sitting over here. Misty, with the district manager for Platinum Soil and Water, and another one would be Thomas Gerkins with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. His office is in Tillamook, but he covers Platte County. It's just because of things in Washington, office space got squeezed out, and so now they're, but he's a good guy and knows what's going on in the county with respect to farms.
There's an ag census every year. You don't have to wait for the decennial census. And surely it's available online.
Got it right here if you want.
Yeah, I'll quickly comment that we were given some data by staff at our last meeting that sort of confronted some of that anyway. And I think the bottom line is that farms have gotten smaller since the 70s with some rather steep decline lately. We haven't lost that many farms total, but the total acreage has gone down quite a bit. But the value of those farms is going rapidly higher. So, to the discussion of some of this, it's harder to get into them without a big investment. So that was at least what we were shown in the packet last time to reflect on some of that.
And the age of the operators is rapidly going up, or up to a limit of dying.
Yep. Pat?
I'd like to tie together a couple of different things here. One is in the 1980 comp plan right here, it said since ag's only 4%, there's no need to do any sort of analysis within ag. I think maybe this group might suggest that an analysis of properties in the context of contemporary ag might be something that we would pick up on. That in 1980 didn't make sense. Overall, though, I want to, as we're thinking about how we update the Clatsop County comp plan for the new world, we're grounded in what the state law is about that. And so I'm struck by when it says the legislative assembly of the state finds and declares that open ag land is super important, you can't replace it. 2, the preservation of a maximum amount of the limited supply of ag land is necessary to conserve the resources and in large blocks enough to make it a viable farm. 3, expansion of urban development into rural areas is a matter of public concern because of the unnecessary increases in costs of community service, conflict between farm and urban activities, and the loss of open space and natural beauty around urban centers occurring as the result of such expansion. I'm very uncomfortable with the conversation about Goal 3 land use planning being centered around accommodating affordable housing, period. It is a very important issue. I think I have seen in other places where the excuse for affordable housing is the opportunity for developers to develop unaffordable housing, Happy Valley near Portland is a classic example of a hue and cry for more space for affordable housing You wound up with McMansions and Happy Valley Estates kind of places. So I think this is not the time to talk about housing. There's a goal for housing, and what the default conversation becomes is, there's some open land, let's put houses on it because we need houses. And we know where that goes. In the 70s, we saw that coming. We validated in the 80s. We should validate it again now as well.
What was your 2% figure that you threw out?
In the classic plan, it talked about how of the county, only like 4.1% or some single-digit percentage of land is in ag as defined by ag. And it said, so therefore, there's no particular reason, we got some dairies and some chickens, no reason to do an analysis of that ag as such.
That was always, economically, it was the bottom, most unimportant 2% of the population. You know, I never heard it attached to a land area or anything like that, but it was kind of the, I used to be on the Classic Economic Development Council Ag Committee. And there was really very little interest because it really was the lowest 2%.
But now I think it's been pointed out, there's sort of a resurgence in farming on even these smaller parcels. And so time for maybe a relook.
Thank you. Jim?
Along a similar vein, I get the sense from the advisory group that people are in favor of conserving agricultural land. But I think the issue now is, how do we encourage maintaining those lands in productive agriculture? My suggestion is two things. One is that if we all agree to the concept of preserving the agricultural lands, we'll ask the professional staff of the planning department to come back with possible ways that we can encourage the preservation of these lands. I think we all want to do that, but we're kind of groping around, what can we legally do under the state statutes?
Legally, the county could buy the land through funds that could be generated very easily as 2% of revenues going into it and a wide range of other positive things.
That could be part of it in terms of program.
And lease those, the county could lease those to people for farming.
Or some other types of programs that could be initiated. Maybe there are some other types of policy at the county level that can happen to encourage maintaining these lands in productive agriculture. It's not clear to me what are some of the options, and I think we're all kind of groping for something like that.
And I don't think just dumping it on staff is the only way to go about it.
No.
We can use your gray matter.
Sure, I mean, we're doing it now.
Correct.
Cheryl?
And I like this idea of groping around. And another topic that always comes up at Northeast CAC is, what is it that we are doing as a CAC, and what's the process? How can we get from just discussion and ideas into things that matter? So what this process is and how we participate is always a discussion. And I was glad to hear that these other folks actually wrote policies. This is very exciting. Or wrote resolutions. So they came with 3 resolutions. And when we got to the goal 4 this time, and it was forestry, they have these very nice policies, and I like that. I wish that goal 3 agriculture had policies. When we're ready to move to forestry, I'm ready to discuss specific policies. So the discussion that came up for us and for others is this concept of, how do we protect and promote small farms? And I think we talked about this last time, but of the 2 farmers that are on the Northeast CAC, one is second generation dairy, and his land holdings are huge by my vocabulary. And the other one is somebody who's fairly new to Clatsop County, a young couple, and they are growing organic vegetables, and they are of that movement that is happening now. They are making their living. This is what they are committed to do. They are part of a growing group of people in Clatsop County, and I think on the West Coast, who want to do this small farm, niche farm. So how do we encourage them? How do we support them? So I mucked around and I kind of sort of wrote a policy. And I'm sure it's not worded correctly, but we're just going to stumble our way through here. So the county shall encourage the creation of.
Cheryl, do you want to make that as a motion? Then we can discuss it.
Oh, okay, we're,
If we're suggesting policy, we should
Okay.
make a motion.
do I move the policy or do I move the?
Yeah, I move that be it resolved that blah, blah, blah.
The wording is really, okay. I move that. The county encourage the creation of small specialty farms, such as organic produce, by extending to the smaller farms the land use protections currently in place for larger farms of, for instance, 80 acres.
Is there any chance you could either repeat that or give a written copy of it, just so that I can restate it to the group? I was too slow to
It's in my
scribe it.
scribbles. Let me repeat it to you. The county shall encourage the creation of small specialty farms, such as organic produce, by extending to the smaller farms the land use protections currently in place for larger farms of 80 acres.
Okay. Do I have a second at the table? That's Tom. I'm going to try to restate this. Please feel free to correct me. The county shall encourage the creation of small specialty farms such as organic produce by extending to the smaller farms the protections available to farms over 80 acres. Is that correct?
Of 80 acres, because I think, yeah.
So Cheryl, are you talking about, was an AF zone, which right now you can actually have small farms, but on purely the EFU zone, which are you talking about?
It seems to me, and I'm not a land use expert, it seems to me that the EFUs that are 80 acres have a lot of nice protections. For instance, they have the right to be stinky, and if the next door neighbors don't like it, there's nothing they can do about it. So those kinds of protections, that it would be nice if we could also give those to the 5-acre folks.
My understanding from the state, was that everybody has the right to stinky farming. That isn't just a special favor for EFU, but.
And that may not have been a good example.
Yeah, well,
so.
but it's a starting point. That if one of the issues is, gee, little farms need the right to be stinky, it may be that Clatsop County has been more restrictive on that than state law. And I think that has come up. This is not just an imaginary thing, but they're kind of like, there is a right to go use your shrimp waste, and people really have no legal standing to say you can't do that because you're next to my McMansion.
So-
That's really what I was getting at, is what are the rights that they do not have, the small farms do not have now, that the large farms have? I mean, and I think that's what Robert was talking about, are there any differences now?
Yeah, and Julie, I'm sure will be much better at answering that than me. And, this was just a sort of clumsy attempt here. How can the county encourage and support those small farms? So this was just my first stab at it. There may be better ways, clearer ways, other vocabulary. So
No, I can just speak personally. I like what you're saying. I just don't know if there are any differences. And if there are differences, what are they, and what do we have control over? So that's,
It
that's the.
it can be encouraged, like everybody can use grounds meat turbo grow, and somehow the county can be supportive of it, but it's not so much that you're not allowed to now.
Ron, you had a
What
comment
resource do we have to quantify that question?
to quantify Jim's question?
Yeah.
Do we have any experts in the here?
What about tax structure? Is tax structure something that is only extended to large farms? The reduced cost?
Chris, you're raising your hand anyway.
One thing I know the county has done is try to expand the allowable uses on ag land to open it up for having large stands, for example, and having events that are, come out and watch me harvest the corn, kind of thing. And we went through that process, I don't know, about 6 months ago or so. And so a lot of things were kind of rolled into the code to the point, and Robert was about that too. And so there are other things besides just saying, well, the little farm should be able to see these big farms. There are other things the county can do to encourage, and that would be just more kinds of uses and latitude and what kind of size of a crowd they might generate in a rural area. What level is that acceptable? Those kinds of things.
Ron.
Tax incentives, I don't know how that plays into it. Probably does.
It may, I wonder about, well, so I'd like to say two things maybe. I wonder about how much of these things we have control over as a county, like tax incentives anyway, at the county level. I feel like things, both stinky farms and things like Chris is talking about, where there's various interactions between county activity and farms of any size, that us saying something like this as a resolution coming out of this advisory body is just saying to the county commissioners or to staff that when you're going through the plan as you publish it and as the county commission approves it, that we would like to see this sort of thing, just conceptually. We would like to see you treat small farms essentially equally to larger farms.
Conceptually is a good word here.
So, and given, given that we are just advisory, I don't find this is something we necessarily need to nail down every detail for, right?
And then maybe put it in the reverse, like, shall not do something to impede small farms from farming. That would be a catch-all.
Is that a amendment, sir?
I guess I would propose for further discussion whether just making a broad, like the county will suggest no land use change that would impede small farming practices.
And we don't know if there are any.
Rural lands, RA1, RA2, RA5, farming is a type 1 use.
You're free to do it.
Yes.
So if you want your little piggery, nail it.
So I think often what happens is people want kind of government, the city or the county to affirmatively do things. And that's not, I mean, the government can't, like, the county can't build buildings with houses and kind of rent them out to people. So there is
Why?
there's sort of an expectation sometimes that.
Why can't it?
Yeah, that may be a separate issue.
That might be a separate issue, but
It's a separate issue.
It might be a separate issue, but I think people tend to think there's a proactive nature of county and municipal government to sort of help certain things, when in fact, we can, in this case, look at the land use laws and uses within there to move us in a direction. So I think probably the best we can do within our authority here is to say what we've said, that we encourage that ag, we acknowledge that ag is small in this county, and we would encourage it in all parcels.
Do we want to encourage little piggeries around the county?
I don't have this, I think we're getting too much in the specifics here, and I would say something general about supporting small.
It's trying to get it down to where we're talking substance.
Yep.
you know, these aren't ludicrous. You know, I'm not aware of any prohibition against agricultural practices of a itsy-bitsy, you know, 1 acre.
So I imagine the
Operation.
concerns of people that were expressed have more to do with the costs of operating and trying to run a particular operation that are entirely outside the county governance or anybody's governance, much less land use planning. So there are things that we can address about land use planning that we can address, but we can't necessarily meet all the needs of someone for proactive action on being able to be more productive as small farmers. I think that's sort of stating the obvious, but I think sometimes things get collapsed, which again brings me back to, we have land use planning considerations at this table, and I don't know that we've really advanced them in the course of this conversation. I like what you said, for sure, but having seen that in those zones anyway, there's nothing prohibiting a small parcel farmer versus an ag farmer, and so there's nothing that land use planning is prohibiting the smaller operator from doing. And so as I'm kind of thinking through that out loud, I'm not sure that there is a motion that I would put out.
Jim, did you have a comment? Yeah, I'll get to you, sir. Go ahead, Jim.
Yes, I am. Didn't mean it. Go right ahead. Take the mic.
Notwithstanding any potential differences between small farms and larger farms, I do agree in principle, Cheryl. I just don't know if it's necessary, because those rights may already be there. But regardless, I would like to see a motion from this committee to, it's not really land use, but in terms of a statement for the county should promote the establishment of small farms. And it's very generic, because this promotional may range from just some literature brochures all the way to purchasing of land and leasing it back. I think that there are a lot of maybe subsidies that in between that are probably more realistic that we could do to help support the establishment of new farms, especially, because that seems to be the rub. You read about that in the literature, is that it's expensive to get going. And so maybe at this point in time, all we can do without further research is just say that the committee would like to promote the establishment with, of these smaller farms, and leave it at that.
That sounds like a vacuous proposal.
Well, but the thing is without more detail, I don't know what we can do.
Can
Add some detail.
Cheryl?
I like this idea, and I think that's getting where I was trying to go. Again, the concept of process, most of us haven't done this before, and we have people who are coming and pouring their hearts out to us and saying, this is important to me, and then we talk about it, and then it all just drifts away. So this is an attempt to put in writing so that 2 years from now, we say, well, didn't we talk about, well, I don't see it in there, well, I thought we were going to do something. So as far as process, then I'm going to suggest that we vote no on my motion that's on the floor, and then you make your clean, simple motion, and we vote yes on that one.
So I'm happy to do whatever the body wants here. But I would say that your opening line, if you just amend to strike the rest of the statement, the county shall encourage the creation of small specialty farms, seems to be essentially what Jim is saying. So if someone would move to amend to take the rest of the statement off, I think we're sort of there already.
I would move that. I think that's an excellent idea.
Okay. So do we have a second on the motion to amend?
Second?
Okay, so to restate, the amended motion would read, the county shall encourage the creation of small specialty farms. That's it. So we're striking such as organic produce, blah, blah, blah. Can I get all those in favor of the amended, or of amending the original motion signify by saying aye?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Okay. So the amendment passes. We'll return to the main motion, which is now a resolution out of this committee that the county shall encourage the creation of small specialty farms, period. Further discussion?
Yes, Cheryl's Cheryl's wording was a little different. She said the formation of small.
As opposed to creation?
Creation is what I have written
Oh, you
down.
do have written,
My
okay.
mouth
Oh,
doesn't
I'm
always say
sorry.
what I write down, but.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. That's what I have now, too,
Okay.
I believe.
So question of staff, and that would be, so I was fixated earlier on sort of land use code changes. Is there a place in the introductory paragraph or preamble setting the context that these kind of sentiments have a home in the comp plan?
It,
Because it's a nice overarching kind of sense of intent and direction of this body without being a particular land use code change.
It-
So these are worthwhile in doing because they will be able to find a home somewhere.
One thing you probably noticed is, for example, in goal 4, you have a list of goals and policies that is very kind of right. You didn't have that with goal 3. That's because they didn't do it for goal 3. It's in part because at the time, agriculture apparently was not so well respected, or people didn't see the value in the smaller farms, and the world is changing. And you are having that discussion right now. So we, going forward, would like to see goals and policies regarding goal 3. So we'll be happy to insert goals and policies as the committees devise them and put them together. One of the things that did come out of some of the other committees, in fact, 3 of them are at the table, 4 of them, pardon me, are at the table, and that is that everybody sort of agreed that the goal 3 agricultural tone was kind of negative for farming in Clatsop County. It was sort of dismissive, and they wanted, in general, to see that revised so that it was more encouraging. And staff agreed that we could do that.
It's kind of the wrong place to be in farming.
At the time, apparently it was, but now people are seeing the value in smaller farms, in local agriculture, in farm to table, in local, just, you know, the local restaurants. There's more value. So, with that in mind, we can make it look like what you want. We can put goals and policies in there where there weren't any. We can find a home for these things.
Thank you for staff feedback there. Since we're approaching the end of our allotted time anyway, I might try to move us to a vote and then make sure we have any wrap-up comments if we need to make them.
Do you need a second?
We've got a second for the main motion, so,
I do have a question about that.
Yes, sir.
Did Cheryl make the motion and the second?
she made the motion, the original motion was seconded by Todd. Yep. So, back to the main motion, which we would be voting on is a resolution from this committee that the county shall encourage the creation of small specialty farms, period. All those in favor of that resolution from the committee signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay.
Nay?
Thank you. The ayes have it, and we will forward that resolution. And staff, you've recorded the resolution, I think the same that I had it, right? Thank you.
I would like to see enabling legislation rather than vacuous legislation.
Noted. Thank you. So any further discussion? So we've got 3 minutes left on our allotted time for the agenda for agriculture. Any closing points or things that especially we should note for future discussion, because we'll likely come back to this? Yes, sir.
Just like to draw a distinction that Cheryl brought up, the difference between small and larger farms is the zoning that's applied. Julie mentioned that a lot of these are parcels of residential agriculture between 1 and 5 acres in the code. And a lot of uses have been previously approved by the state on EFU and actual farmland, but those have not been adopted into the small farms. The farm to table is not one that's really considered not so much an agricultural use, but farm tours, classes, different kind of uses like that. You have the dragon kiln operation out here on EFU land, I believe, in Lewis and Clark. There are different operations where the land is not necessarily suitable. Those can be addressed possibly in a resolution that could be encouraged. I don't know if that would fit under goal 3 with the RA5 and smaller parcels, but it definitely is an important distinction between small and large.
Thank you. Thank you for that input. And Christie?
I just wanted to share that the State Board of Agriculture will be in Astoria December, it's a Wednesday and Thursday. Fourth and fifth. Yeah, they're doing some tours of our county, so their meetings go around the state throughout the years, and they haven't been to Astoria in a while, so I just thought it might be of interest to some of you to attend. 8:30 to 4:30, on the Wednesday, and the Thursday is just a half a day, and they'll be at the Holiday Inn Express is where it begins. And the egg census is voluntary, and it's done once every 5 years, and we're having trouble, this year getting people to fill it out, so it is not a true representation of our county. I know one of our dairy farmers is not on there because he did not fill it out. So I usually can look at that and kind of see by what I have in the county and who's done their paperwork, and they'll get in touch with us to kind of prod along the ones that haven't turned in their paperwork.
Thank you.
The date again
For the State Board of Ag,
for the tour?
December,
Wednesday's the 4th.
December 4th and 5th, and it starts at the Holiday Inn Express in Astoria, 204 West Marine.
Thank you, Missy.
Thank you.
So is that tour by the actual applying to be on the tour, that's closed already? Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't believe it's closed. The meeting's open, and they're going to have shuttles for the tour.
So it's just whoever shows up?
I believe so. They didn't say that we had to RSVP. They shared the meeting notice with me yesterday, and then I shared it with whoever I knew was interested. Gail was one of them.
They're all public meetings.
Yeah. But they're gonna go to Wilson Park School and see the farm to school program and how it works. And it sounds like they're going.
Cool. Great. Thank you.
Brings up something kind of tangential to this, but I'm thinking a lot about people who help the small farms but drive in from town. And so sort of the pattern of farming is changing too, from the farmers living on the farm to people coming out from town, helping out in certain practices and things like that. Maybe down the road, those kinds of things will come up as particulars that might jog our minds for a good idea.
Sure. Thank you. With no objection from the group, I may move us to go for discussion. Hearing none, let's move ahead. It is traditional at this point, though we've only done it 3 times, for staff to give us a bit of an introduction to a goal. Are we happy to do that today as well?
I can give you a brief.
I was just going to say, would this be a good time for us to talk about the field trip that we did this morning?
I was hoping for the staff overview, so especially the
Okay.
public would all be on the same page, and then we can go to overview. And then I was actually hoping to maybe get input from the folks in the audience who are here to talk about forestry and specifically what we might cover while you're here today.
And 2 of them were on the tour this morning.
Great.
I will be brief. I think you all have much more to discuss than I do. So when staff was preparing this, it was very difficult to hone this down to about 6 pages. There's so much to talk about. We borrowed information from the Oregon Department of Forestry, from OFRI. You have some of the newest information that's coming out from state boards regarding carbon sequestration. You have so many things going on at the legislative level right at the moment. This is a very hot topic. Forestry and forest lands is a very hot topic right now. And you can see that by the audience that is here. The forest industry is definitely taking notice that we're looking at goal 4. In fact, we had to actually tell them, no, we're looking at all the goals. We're not just picking on goal 4. So there's been some concern that the county is going to do something with forest lands and regulations, and the county does not have that ability. The county does not regulate forestry. That's the Oregon Department of Forestry's job. That said, the overwhelming acreage in this county is in forest land of some sort. Somebody asked me, I think it was Cheryl asked me earlier today, the percentage of state forest to private forest lands, and I don't have the percentage figures, but I do know that about 200,000 acres is in private and about 155 or 160,000 is in public forest lands. That's what we do here. We grow trees, and we go to the woods for our recreational purposes. We had that wonderful tour today by Greenwood, and they leave their forest land available to the public to use. You just go on their website and you can sign up, but it's free. What a marvelous resource. This is still a major employer in our county. And so anyway, there's this balance, and there's the concerns. We have recreation, we have the environment, we have watersheds. So there's a lot here, and that's why all those goals and policies are listed. And it wasn't that we wanted you to necessarily create something over again, but to review what we have. Are we on target? Are we doing what we want to do? Are there things that we're missing that we should add? Knowing, though, that you are not going to be able to rewrite the Forest Practices Act. You might decide that you have some things that you're interested in that you want to talk to your legislators about or something like that, but this committee and the county will not be rewriting the Forest Practices Act. I saw a hand go up.
What about the county has extensive county forests? Are those applicable to the changes that we might make in this context?
It depends on how they're being used. I mean, we've got state parks. I'm not sure which forest lands you're talking about.
I believe Clatsop County has Clatsop County forest lands that are managed.
By the Oregon Department of Forestry?
Okay, so that's the same, okay, very good.
Okay, yeah, the Oregon Department of Forestry manages those. So that's going to be in that one figure. So I'm really not going to give you much more information. I provided you, actually I wrote the Goal 4 overview that you have here. So I provided that. The greatest concern that we were wondering about, honestly, is we have so much that we depend on our forests for. I mean, it's jobs, it's our watersheds, it's we have fire concerns, we have so much. Anyway, it's a matter of finding the balance. So with that, maybe you want to have your discussion. I'll bow out now.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's a good introduction for us. I'm inclined to just for clarity's sake to at least read the preamble for Goal 4, to conserve forest lands by maintaining the forest land base and to protect the state's forest economy by making possible economically efficient forest practices that assure the continuous growing and harvesting of forest tree species as the leading use on forest land, consistent with sound management of soil, air, water, and fish, and wildlife resources, and to provide for recreational opportunities and agriculture. So that's the preamble for Goal 4 in the OAR. Yeah. So I think it would be appropriate for us to talk briefly about the tour that took place today. Who would like to start that discussion, or who would like to lead the discussion of that? Because I understand that there were several people on the tour here. Cheryl? Sure.
So this morning we went on a field trip. A number of the folks who are here went. It was Greenwood Resources and then Lewis and Clark Timberlands, and the technical differences between those I'm not clear on, but I do know that it's under both of those vocabulary. I thought it was a fabulous use of our time this morning. We went to 3 different sites. We got to see the forest logging process sort of from the beginning to the end. Lots of discussion, lots of questions. There were a number of professional foresters who were available to us, both professional foresters that were employed by Greenwood resources, and also professional foresters from State Department, State Forestry. Yeah, and I think that's sort of a nice summary. There were 12 of us who attended, and, Gail shut it down as soon as she got to 12. It was such a nice overview and a really nice Q&A that I was wishing that every single solitary CAC person could have attended.
Do you sense I'll turn into a statement. I sense a tension, which is kind of an absurd statement, a defensiveness in the county, that I thought it was a lovely outing, but I don't mean but, a lead person in the thing doesn't plan to be here Monday for another gathering on the topic, because I think he expressed that he perceives it as not talking heads, but, people spouting talking points, and it just wasn't worth its time to come. So there's just a strange bit of conflict, as if we're against the forest industry. And I think you have to acknowledge that tension exists before what lies under it can be addressed.
Jim also attended the field trip this morning. He may have something to say.
Yes, Robert, yes, that tension has existed. Quite frankly, it's existed during my entire career. And having some tension is not necessarily a bad thing, because you get a diversity of opinions. The hard part is to trying to get the input from a variety of positions to come up with something that society supports. It's like, matter of fact, I think one person this morning said, I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit because I've used something like this similarly. If you optimize for a particular resource, it will be at the detriment of your other resources. That's inevitable. That, to me, is like one of those principal rules. And that, for instance, yesteryear, it was very much more timber-centric. Other resources suffer. But if you optimize for northern spotted owl or marble murrelet, that's an old-growth dependent species, your early cereal stage dependent species will suffer. I mean, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So the issue really is that balancing, and society is the one that dictates where that balance is in the long run, and society changes over time. I think we have seen that here in the state, and it's dynamic. It's always changing. And that's not necessarily bad.
I live on Classic Plains, and I had kind of the Rachel Carson sensation of Silent Spring. This is this vast area, and I'd look and look and look. Didn't see any eagles, didn't see any vultures. It was only when we got near the private home and I saw a blue jay. And to turn that into a positive, I think edges of ecosystems are very important. So here was this vast area that was largely one ecosystem. It was not biodiversity. When you'd ask, gee, have you considered planting other species? Well, no. There was a rationale for doing exactly what was being done. And I'm not meaning to knock that. I was just startled. When I went home, there were a flock of Asian doves that flew in, and flocks of stellar jays. And it was a But I live in an area where there are lots of edges. You know, there's the ocean, there are the rivers, there are the swamps, in other words, it was not all focused on how do we grind out the most trees. And Clatsop County is one of the best places in the world for growing trees. But I think these other factors, that I love looking up in the top of the roof and seeing a bald eagle sitting there. You know, it's, and expecting that.
Excuse me, Robert.
Please.
Actually, we saw a bald eagle at the harvesting site in the distance, so there was actually one there. But no, I understand what you're saying, and from more of a science perspective, what you're talking about is more, landscape management. And landscape means different things to different people. And if you look at it from a more of an extensive landscape perspective, that's where it is more desirable to have places where you literally preserve forests, but also other places where you can do intensive forest management. You have riparian areas or meadows, the Clatsop Plains. From a broader perspective, that's something that gets into something that's been bothering me, and maybe this is, just throw this out now, is that one of the problems with the gold process is that it chunks up the landscape into distinct portions, and it doesn't look at the interaction between those goals. And I consider that, that's a shame. I don't know how to correct that, but I don't have any particular ideas, but I think that's a shortcoming. And because as soon as you cross this boundary from one zone to another zone that's represented in these goals, all of a sudden your rules change completely.
And I think that's something that somehow we can improve on the new comprehensive plan or on the updated.
I don't know what we can do, but that's something that's high on my list, and how we can kind of look at this in a more landscape perspective, a greater landscape perspective, as well as sort of feather the edges between these harsh zone changes. But that's something else.
So we have a guest tonight from Greenwood. Sir, did you come by chance to talk about your operations or about the tour, either one?
No, I mostly came to listen and answer any questions I could. I'd like to distinguish what Cheryl said, that Greenwood Resources is the manager of the timberlands. The actual owner is an LLC called Lewis and Clark Oregon Timberlands, but there are a couple of different LLCs out there that it goes. Greenwood Resources is a wholly owned subsidiary of a company called New which was created out of TIAA, the Teachers Investment Annuity. And one of their hallmarks is sustainability, and that goes all the way down through the company. And we subscribe to Sustainable Forest Practices Act, or Sustainable Forest Initiative, SFI, standards and practices. We're audited every year by third party, as well as OEF. It's very, very active. We work with it very closely. And it's really an incredible process. And I spoke to Mark Morgans before I came here tonight, and he was very impressed with the group. He said they asked a lot of questions. People were very interested, and we've been doing these tours for quite a while. We organized the annual Community Views Forestry Tour, and it's always very popular. I don't do that anymore. I'm only working part-time. But we could organize tours out there for any group at any time, and Mark loves to take them out. So
Cool.
just keep that as an open invitation, and anytime you want to go out and see other sites, other timber companies as well have offered tours. We have participated with us in the community use forest reserves before, so it's a very good experience to see what actually happens out on the land.
Thank you.
I bet very well on the hook of the sustainability. It sounded totally true. What the company, what the IA aims are, and that it somewhere hidden in our county planning process, sustainability 3 years ago was a significant part of it. Kind of with a previous manager, it was not his thing. it sort of disappeared. But you could go back, find a binder where sustainability was an important county attitude that seemed totally compatible with what you all sincerely are doing. And I think there's a meeting up on the college campus tonight, and I'm not going to, that deals with the same broad topic.
Pat, thank you for your patience.
Sure, yeah, so, great, I have a question, and it is, as I'm looking at the comprehensive plan for the county, looking at the private industrial portion of forestry in the county, and looking back, and it says, as shown in Table 6, the largest corporate timber landowner is Crown Zellerbach.
Their predecessor.
Correct. And so what I'm curious about is the nature of the corporate ownership, because something that has changed significantly since 1980 is the Crown Zellerbachs have now turned into these holding companies that we can just
But
sort
it's
of...
a teacher's insurance.
Yeah, Tia Kraft, I'm familiar with them. They're hopefully going to pay me in my retirement. Yeah, REIT, what did I say? Okay, so REIT, okay, so my question is, in looking at the way that the private structure was when the plan was currently written, it was an entirely different structure. My understanding is the timber companies are now real estate investment trusts in some kind of legal structure, and that is a fairly recent change. And I don't know why that change was made. I'm curious about why that a timber company, because I go back to the comprehensive plan that you were reading earlier, Andy, about 4, and you know, the timber industry, local timber industry is under many kind of pressures, but this says to conserve forest land by maintaining the forest base and protect the state's forest economy by making possible economically efficient forest practices that assure the continuous growing and harvesting of forest tree species as the leading use on forest land, consistent with sound management. I don't know what real estate investment trusts are, but I'm wondering if the nature of the ownership of the property was different in order for it to be sold off for things other than the primary production of trees. And so, you know, there are the forest practices that are conducted by the Forest Practices Act. I guess I'm looking with curiosity towards the changing nature of the corporate ownership of the dominant harvesters and employers in the county, and I'm wondering, you know, why that change was made, what the implications are, and if there's any implications or suggestions for us as we're thinking towards the next however many years about forestry in the county, if there's anything we need to worry about there. And I don't know the answers, but I'm very curious.
Half a dozen shifts of ownership after Crown Zellerbach, you know, offshore.
I want to know my understanding is they're currently real estate investment trusts. I don't know what that is. I need to know what that is for me to make good decisions in this committee. I'd love to hear more about that and what the implications are.
So I do want you two to contribute. Is that I think that's a question for staff, maybe to bring us information back.
That would
Is
be
it
terrific.
possible for us to get some information about the?
real estate investment trust?
Yeah. Sure.
That'd be great.
Probably a better idea.
And even just.
He's not paid by us, to be frank. You know, like our
Real estate investment trust, and why they might be beneficial or not to the timber. I mean, this is outside my area.
Okay.
It is.
Okay.
And I don't detect, well, I didn't.
Okay, well, then I'm going to come back to something Jim said, which is one of the most important things about these goals is that they're chopped up into goals, and it's the edge effects and it's the interrelationships between them. I think taxes have came up in goal 3 and taxes have come up in goal 4. It's not my bailiwick either. I'm not suggesting it's yours. What I'm suggesting is they're interrelated, and it's very difficult to make good decisions about what goes on the ground when there's things changing about the incentives of the people managing on the ground.
Yeah.
And so I know I'm not going to get full clarity on that, but it seems to be a significant change, especially with regard to forestry, that we haven't seen in ag, for example, and I'm wondering if there are implications. So maybe presentations. I've seen forestry practices, and they are very impressive. This might be another kind of workshop that we could talk about.
No, I think I find this to be a very legitimate discussion for this group, and maybe not you specifically, but staff in general, to try to come back with an answer, even if it's from a state department or from a company that's using these vehicles, you know, to give us more information about this. Yeah. But you did say that you might be able to offer some clarity in the interim.
Just a word or two, if I may.
Sure.
The real estate investment trust came as a result of the change in tax laws, and it was made in concert with getting the timber companies to become less vertically integrated. Companies like Crown Z and Weyerhaeuser and so on, they used to grow, they own the land, they planted the trees, they grew the timber, they harvested the process into wood, they sold paper. They did everything vertically. The model now is for a horizontal integration. So one company or LLC will just be involved in timber production. And that's primarily what our business is. We have one LLC, it's a taxable REIT subsidiary that manages lands that, for tax purposes, but we don't sell them. That's very complicated now, a lot of it's proprietary information, but a company like Weyerhaeuser has a real estate branch, and they're actively involved in selling land, and they try and get HBU higher use value for it, like they did on Seaside. We basically don't follow that model, and it's all for tax purposes, for the benefit of the investors. But we still manage, the timberlands as timberlands, and the Department of Forestry can confirm that as well. But that's, there aren't all REITs there. Most companies have a REIT branch or LLC, for handling certain types of tax situations and so on. But you're right, it's very, very complicated. But primarily, we're all just managing timber.
Do you see any implications that this committee would consider with regard to that, or something we're not considering?
Not really, no, like I said, the same thing, it's all this timber management. The taxation of it and so on is basically a federal issue, it's IRS, and doesn't, all of the land is still paid county taxes, for instance. It's all pretty,
And it's not like TIAA is attempting to flip the timberlands.
no, not at all. In fact, they love the timber investment. And people who are interested in green investing are very, very, the portfolio's increasing all the time. They're not about to flip the timberlands.
They could.
But it's unlikely, it's what we've done in the past. Every time you could find someone who'd pay more, you'd sell it, and then they'd turn around and they'd cut more, pay off the debt. And that went through multiple chains of people I happily have forgotten their names.
Yeah. We've been under this ownership for well over 10 years, though. And they're, as far as I know, it's all my favorite. There's no interest in selling off.
Thank you for that, that input and the broad discussion here. Any other comments or considerations about Greenwood Resources before we move on, either from the tour or asking about operations further?
I would just like to make one, just single comment.
Sure.
I'm very suspect of the word sustainability, because in Oregon, what that means is turning all of our formerly natural forests into tree farms. And if you look at the Google Earth images of the North Coast, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And we do this at the detriment of a lot of things. It's not just wildlife. The Endangered Species Act is there not strictly to protect these animals. It's there to put a roadblock in front of the kind of greed that has driven large corporations to continually take more and more and more, to the extent that now we have passage, or at least the initial success of the $1 billion lawsuit, which essentially, because the state can possibly pay that, essentially will open up more of our state forests to timber companies for this real logging. In the time of global warming, we're going to look back at this as a tragic mistake. Because this is one area of the country that can actually sequester carbon better than any other area with fast-growing trees. We have still some few big trees on the line. But unless we acknowledge that we are in an absolute crisis, 11,000 scientists from over 100 governmental structures, we are facing unfathomable suffering within our, not just within our lifetime, but certainly within our children's discussion. It's happening very fast. And I think that has to be kept in the forefront. You talk about things like small parcel, large parcel farming. Well, I think there should be some accommodation. I don't know if this group is want to do it, but for farmers who do farming that's more climate friendly. I've heard the presidential candidates talking about this, particularly the big farms, where they can plant crops and use way less water, minimize the use of various sprays, all these kinds of things. Maybe some accommodation can be written into when you're dealing with the level that you're dealing with to accommodate farmers that, you know, are doing something like that, you know, allow you to do that. And I know there's some big areas, big parcels of land that are coming up on kind of for sale. For instance, all those poplar trees that are growing out along Apple Tree, the whole landscape is going to be for sale. So there could be an extremely large agricultural project in there. It's really important that project is not paid, you know, water right, or, you know, it was maybe raising something that was climate resistant, climate change resistance, quinoa.
And outside the county, but outside of Clatsop County. Outside of Clatsop County, you know, it is not something within the purview of our county. Yeah, yeah.
All right, we're talking about regulations on structures around these small large farms. Would that be possible? Just let me know if you have discussion.
Thank you for your thoughts. So I would like to, given we've only got a relatively short amount of time left, I think we're scheduled till 6:30, is that correct?
Something like that.
6:40, thank you.
Your last word is at 6:40.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure that, that the members of the public, especially from the state and from Hampton and Stimson, got a chance to speak as well, especially if you, so we've got some questions that we will be broadly discussing over this session and future sessions about forestry. But if there are specific topics that you want to make sure that we cover or have information that you'd like to share with us, with the permission of the group, I would invite them to speak to us. Okay. I don't have any particular order in mind.
No, I'm mainly here to elicit and serve the resources of everybody that's come up. A lot of these are, and staff mentioned, very complex topics, a lot of facets, and, you know, I do my best to tell it like it is and do the facts as I understand them. So that's my main goal here, other than to mention that there are a couple of those old vertically integrated dinosaurs still around that both have those that manage the land, so.
Okay, thank you.
Just to familiarize yourself with beyond about 10 of what we do. We are vertically integrated. We have 3 mills and a hardwood plant in Oregon, none in Clatsop, forestry area. So that's about 17,000 acres in Clatsop County, and most is in the southeast corner.
Okay.
Who are you with again? I missed it.
Stimson, Lumber.
And would you, anything that you think, as we're sitting here talking about this, that you think would be a good thing to do or not to do? As far as land, again, we're looking at land use.
You've covered a lot of
Exactly.
territory. I think my opening comment as a company, we're interested in maintaining, I guess, the ability to manage our land under the Forest Practices Act, with the thought that the Forest Practices Act is open to being amended by the best science available going forward. So
Outside of this process.
correct. Yeah. Correct. So we understand that things are evolving. Similar to
easy way to describe the ownership of Stimson?
Stimson is privately held. by
And are they getting
family,
old?
Probably 3 generations, possibly 4 generations.
Still showing interest in
Definitely.
trees?
Definitely. They're beautiful.
Can I come back? Go ahead, Jim.
Have they been accumulating any acres
Well, I'll just relate my experience. I started with Stimson Lumber as a summer employee going to college in 1980. At that time, I owned about 20,000 acres, about 3 of it in Washington and the balance here. Over time, they have accumulated. Currently, we own roughly 178,000 acres in Oregon, and then they have acquired land in eastern Washington, Idaho, and Montana. So the focus is, in general, small logs, stud mill, 2x4, 2x6, 4x4. Flat sky is an exception, so long log, which they cut up to 40 foot lengths. Some larger
So I'd like to come at it from another direction, everybody, as far as, so from someone looking at land use, possibly making changes to the forestry component of the land use plan, is there something that you bumped up in other counties and in other jurisdictions that have caused you heartache, or that have been particularly useful, or in that land use planning zone? I'm not seeing a lot of nexus between the land use planning.
I would just amend that to include our county.
Pardon?
I would just amend that to include our county. I mean, if there are things in our county.
Oh,
plan.
certainly. But also by comparison, if there's some other county that has a particular land use approach or something like that, that's particularly good or bad. I'm struggling outside of forest practices, that is not what we deal with here. It's land use planning and the landscape stuff. If any good ideas you've seen elsewhere or bad ideas that we might consider?
So,
Okay.
as far as what I think, the purview of this committee is, land use conversion is the only, big thing that I would point out. And historically, Oregon's done a very good job in that regard. We have pretty good land use rules. If you look at some other places in the Pacific Northwest, there are much higher conversion rates of forest land over to generally development or development. As mill owners, that's something that is concern to us, because that is land that no longer is free from the city. There are definitely environmental consequences to those conversions as well.
And that was my concern, I guess, about the particular nature of ownership, if that might accelerate towards one or another about that. But I guess that's a different issue up in the clouds that I.
It was more a threat, a couple of decades ago. You'd kind of expect it to go from forest to ag to housing, and kind of a falling dominoes. And fortunately, we haven't, from our, view, that didn't happen. But it was the sort of thing that worried the national parks. You'd see trees disappear, cattle come on board, and you were waiting to see the next step of subdivision.
So, just somebody, what year, go ahead.
Ron, you had a.
If you could add change something to the Forest Practice Act that would make it more resilient for generations on down the road. Generations. What would you think?
I'll make a comment. I attended
Please.
Jewel meeting earlier in the week. So they were trying to think of how to incentivize carbon sequestration and amending the forest practices. Ask Ashley to comment, but if you're maintaining a forest as a forest, there's no obligation to harvest. The challenge is incentivizing people to carry timber or trees that long, put off harvesting that long.
As long as
Does that make
your
any sense?
company worth were increasing.
This is just addressing
Say that another way.
for the jewel.
Say that another way.
Well, they were, my interpretation of the comments of some of the members was they felt they needed to amend the Forest Practices Act to allow carbon sequestration. And all you need to do is
asset grows without having to pay taxes on it.
It all comes back.
Yes, Jim?
Yeah, just like, excuse me, just one thing. Just to comment on incentivizing people or forest owners to keep trees as trees, is like, that's one of the main objectives of the state of California. They pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into paying landowners to not cut their trees for a certain period of time in return of getting some payments. And that's exactly what you're talking about, whether it's, I'm not suggesting it's ODF, but that is a model that California has used as one of their objectives to reduce emissions. In this case, it's to sequester the carbon.
Yep.
And I would say that this is getting to this question, and not a person who can't live on for answering this question, but, you know, a statutory focus on peer-reviewed research and regulating, you know, what is the workforce practices, I think would, what was the term you used?
Resilient.
Resilient, yeah, I mean, it's hard, there's a lot of arguing that goes on out there between different interest groups about what policy should be, and it's a lot harder to argue with the science about, one of that, say, we're basing our policy on this. I think that takes a right for a discussion sometimes.
Yeah, Pat?
You're going to follow on that subject, go ahead.
Well, yes, actually. I do have a similar question in terms of the edges of your landowners, your ownership, in terms of, are there certain things that you feel really rankle the private individual, not the industrial land user on the other side of your property boundary, that you see from your perspective, what is it that you could think of that we could change? And on the flip side is from any other segment of the audience that would say, from a private resident's perspective, what is it that rankles you that the industrial landowner just on the other side of your property line is doing that bothers you? So I see that's really where the area that we may have some influence is not on the forestry side, but actually on the non-forestry side through some kind of policy changes or regulations. So I'd like to hear personally from both sides. I know we have heavy industry represented here, but maybe in others we have a more balanced approach.
Well, the primary thing we're going to hear from private landowners that are on the edge of timber harvested is not enough notification as to when aerial spraying is going to be taking place, and not large enough buffers between properties. The Oregon Forest Practices Act has attracted a lot of timber companies to this state, primarily because it has the weakest buffers regarding
So thank you. So to recap, essentially, watersheds that have drinking water and herbicide spraying, especially in relationship to drinking water, but also in general, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Well, some of the buffers that are, these are the new forward-thinking changes that have taken place in the Oregon Forest Practices Act, which have really been minimal in the last 25 years. It increased the buffers around schools and homes to 60 feet for aerial plant, normally nothing. You have to think about that too much to realize. Okay. So, there's lots of room for improvement.
I'd like to hear from industry in terms of, some issues that you have. Yes?
Well, I'll talk. You want to chime in on that? We recently did two relatively small, and I'm taking your question as what we thought when we're on the interviews.
That's right.
So we recently harvested adjoining two subdivisions along in Seaside, relatively small units, and they were designed small purposely to kind of minimize what people would be looking at. So our normal process is we send out letters to the neighbors, we told them what our plans were, what they would see, what we were going to do, what we weren't going to do. And some of those warrants, we weren't going to aerially spray. In fact, we weren't going to use herbicides whatsoever. Timber types and topography of the two were quite different. As for the developments, one was a relatively new development, which had residents from many states that had moved to Seaside. The northerly unit was an older timber type, it was on a slope, that had a bench, now down behind 8 to 10 residences, it was one empty lot. Harvesting involved, we had many hazard trees on that unit that we literally had to fall the timber behind them, log it, and come back, hire someone to rig all of those trees, and then actually haul them over. As we were doing that, there were trees that were actually on private landowners. They came out asking us, can you take these trees for us? I.e., the trees were leaning over their homes, and at some point probably fall on. Anyhow, I'm getting far aside, but we did not burn, we did not spray those units, and have no plans to spray. If we had to spray in there to get the trees off, we would be doing it correctly. No one in their right mind is going to spray 50 feet off of a home, 2,000 feet off of a home. Anyhow, so, but I don't know what you do from a land planning standpoint to avoid, you have a north-south line, you have homes on one side, and you have a forest growing on the other. Some creative planning on my part, that's kind of my job, small units.
You were willing to forego spraying in those areas, and I'm wondering, how much of an impact does spraying have on your production?
It depends, quite simply, on many, many factors. Here on the coast, in predominantly hemlock and spruce forests, they grow so dense that you have very little competition under there. And what we have found, in our experience, if you can time it properly, you have a late summer, early fall harvest, you get that harvested, and you do your sector work that you need to do, and you get those trees in the ground that winter, you get your trees growing before you have any competition, and they get established and they grow.
Thank you.
I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but the new OSU extension forester was out on the tour today, and he's been trying to show you. If you wanted numbers from studies that have been done on impact reduction, that sort of thing, vegetation management, those exist, and I'm sure he'd be happy to look them up and provide them to you. Thank you. Dan Stark.
I'll add one comment.
Sure.
So we developed some relationships with these neighbors. And one was surprising. We got a phone call from one of the neighbors who had an organic garden in the back and was very concerned about some things. But her reflection after the harvest was, I get an extra 3 hours of sunlight that I never had before. Pluses and minuses.
Thank you. Yes, Pat.
I guess on a different subject, and I don't know if this is a hazards goal 7 note for however many months that's going to be before we get to 7, goodness gracious, but related to ag, and I think what Judd said about the concern about changing uses and, what did you say, like turning land over, conversions. So I would just like to note that in the context of forestry and conversions, I want to both say two things. One, overall for this plan, I think we ought to reestablish the value of UGBs and that they're good. And I want to make it a quick exception for kind of what might be obvious, but for relocating for tsunami safety. I mean, I think UGBs are sacred, but I think the example of Seaside and moving the school to high ground was a no-brainer. And I guess in the context of the comp plan, those kind of considerations for that acute and unusual circumstance, I would hold out.
In Warrenton, would you ask them to give up some of their areas if they're going to gain growth areas?
I wouldn't want to get in that conversation. I'd let that play out at the state level or whatever. But I do think that one thing about, in this county, like, again, these things that kind of connect that aren't exactly goals. For me, I think when we come to 7, I think that the tsunami piece of it is just so strange and so unusual that it might, we might need to accommodate some unusual exceptions for things like UGB changes, specifically prescribed, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think the example with forestry and Seaside is a good one where it didn't seem to cause any pain and it was a mutual gain-gain. So save that note for goal 7, I guess, but I'll for sure to bring it up.
Yeah, I think actually, and we might revisit when we do shorelines and things like that, because with the shoreline maps, like telling us there's going to be likely change, that's another place where we may have essentially displaced populations. And if they want to stay in county, the UGBs may make that difficult. Thank you all for your input. I'm happy to take more input from the public as we go along, but I want to turn this over to sort of the group membership, and especially, so we've got some prompts for discussion if we want to go through those, or if you have things either from your liaison groups or from you personally that you would like to talk about in Goal 4, let's get started on that. I would be happy to take hands or comments from the group. Cheryl.
I was, as I mentioned before, very pleased that we have policies. How many policies did we end up with here?
And
23 policies. It's nice to be able to deal with those. They're clear and they're clean, and ultimately, whenever we get around to it, I would specifically like to look at and discuss policy 3.
Okay. Cheryl.
Which addresses Forest Practices Act.
I might just clarify for the public that Cheryl is describing that in the Goal 4 for the county, as we were talking about with agriculture, we didn't have any policies. With forestry, we in fact have 23 policies. It's a lengthy list, and they go into some depth. So, sorry, go ahead, Cheryl.
Thank you. Yeah, I would at some point like to address policy 3, which is Forest Practices Act. I would also like to address policy 10, which is specifically watersheds. And what we might do, we have a limited amount of time. I would like to address something that's not in the policies, and that's specifically salmon. And just as a quick one, We're out in northeast Clatsop County, and my husband and I have 12.8 acres. And ours is forestry farm. And we have forest lands on our property, and we have selectively cut, we have replanted. Our back property line is state forestry. So the forestry issue is near and dear to my heart. And I spent almost 2 weeks going through this. I have my little tabs. I'm ready to roll. I'm ready to discuss this. So I'm just going to suggest that, for me at least, to address the policies, because they are clear and clean and sharp, is more useful than the discussion questions. So that's what I'm suggesting. So something which is not addressed in here is salmon. So what I am suggesting is that we would add a policy identifying salmon as an endangered species. When they spoke about endangered species here, they mentioned bald eagles, and in the past, 100 years ago, when we did the original one, there was an inventory. I mean, they listed where all the bald eagles were in Clatsop County. But salmon did not get listed in here, did not get mentioned in here. There are currently 13 endangered species, threatened or endangered, on the Columbia River. I think most of us know that. Certainly, all of the streams that have their headlands in forests lead into the Columbia River and directly impact those 13 endangered or threatened species. So what we do on our forest lands in Clatsop County affects salmon, and that is not addressed in here. It is not recognized in here, and I think that it needs to be. There was a lengthy piece about elk.
Yeah.
And it goes on and on and on and on, and then salmon never even got mentioned in here.
Was there anything about heron and
yeah.
rookeries?
Not that I
You know,
remember.
that used to seem like something of interest, you know, prior to the Astoria football field or something, out around the dump. But I really haven't seen as many herons, and I've not heard anyone mention a heron rookery since Todd was a youngster.
On,
Herons are specifically? Thank you. Do you know if that includes salmon? I don't know the Forest Practices Act. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Cheryl, do you have policy language at hand that you would suggest for that?
I do not.
Okay.
So I just wanted to bring that up as a general discussion topic.
Sure.
In our handouts in the land use plan as written up before, let's see, I can go back to the beginning of this. I'll then tell you what page I'm on. So it's goal 4, it's our printed out goal 4. So it's goal 4, forest lands adopted September 10, 1980, amended in 83. And then there are some general findings. On page 1 in the general findings, I want to read a paragraph to you. So it's at the bottom of page 1, it's the last paragraph. Concern is increasing over the effects of traditional forest management practices such as herbicide spraying, road building, and harvesting on watersheds, recreational areas, fish and wildlife habitat, and nearby residents. Forest owners are also concerned about these issues and the controversy surrounding them. The Forest Practices Act protects these forest resources, and many feel that the Act adequately controls the adverse impacts associated with commercial forestry. Other county residents believe the Act is too weak and advocate greater control over forest practices. I agree wholeheartedly with that paragraph. I would like for that paragraph to continue to be in there as we move forward and do the new ones. And it's, we're going to start down that path now. There are different views here about what is appropriate in the forests, and it's okay to disagree. I asked a lot of hard questions today. I will continue to ask hard questions, and there are different ways to address these issues. So for right now, I just want to speak up on behalf of salmon as endangered species that are not addressed in here and are highly impacted. I think it's interesting that there's no land use plan for the Columbia River.
Cheryl, just one sec, Jim. Can I ask, so I think this is a valid direction for us to go. Can you research what is already covered in the Forest Practices Act as far as fish or salmon, and bring proposed language for us, preferably shorter than Section 7 on elk? But if you could propose language for us to suggest staff include, then it's easy for us to vote and massage the language. But I think it's a great topic for us to explore, but I just want to have something specific to talk about and vote on, if that's
I will
possible.
give that a go, and if anybody else wants to take that on, go for it.
Thank you. Jim? Jim, did you have other comments?
Yeah, I actually have a clarification question, Cheryl. You mentioned salmon was not mentioned. What about the other threatened endangered species? I mean, do you want it to be a little more generic because there are federally listed threatened endangered species? There are state-listed species? What?
Good question, and I don't have a strong feeling on that. I am very focused on salmon, so, and it does address fish in here, so, I mean, fish are not ignored. There are fish-bearing streams. Class 1 streams have certain protections that streams that that are not fish-bearing do not have. So there, I mean, it is recognized in here. There are fish in here. But,
Well, of course,
if you wanted to expand it out, go for it. I'm just focused on salmon.
Well, that was just a clarification question, but I'd be willing to help you regardless. Of course, I'm sure you're aware with the federal T&E species, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and NOAA fisheries, depending upon the type of species, really has the say on that. So are you talking about, even when they don't mandate certain things, that certain policies that would try to reinforce the assistance of these species?
I think so, and what we're going to get into here sooner rather than later is we're going to run into this brick wall called Forest Practices Act, which very clearly says that cities and counties cannot make any rulings that limit Forest Practices Act. So I don't know what we can do, and that's a discussion that we will have as we go down the road also.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe we can both learn and explore this.
Robert, thank you for your patience, too.
There was what I found to be a quirk on prohibitions, or where you have to take an exception, or and actually will grant exceptions. I don't know if anyone's ever asked for one, or what it takes. If you want to go plant a pine tree instead of the approved species, and it's just one of these oddities that the state cares, what species you go plant. And, so yes, you can go do your firs, spruce, hemlock, but if you want to go plant a pine on your reforestation, that's where we have to do another may I. And I don't know if anybody has ever asked for an exception, but it's something that forestry grants an exception to allow you to go plant a pine tree. And it's just fascinating, because I think with the global warming, my pines are the happiest of anything. My noble firs, which are legal, say we really don't like it here anymore. It's just kind of a fascinating, property rights, freedom, that most people don't give a damn. But it's just one of those fascinating little curiosities that I learned today in my first tour.
I'm learning how unloved the sculpin is. I'm gonna have to check with the sculpin community, and I will report back.
The Oregon farm only encourages native forest species that have a commercial value in the local area. So when a landowner, and it's only happened once or twice, has come to me and wanted to plant something that is really not locally native, I've said, well, to meet the intent of the Forest Practices Act, you need 200 seedlings to the acre, or 80 square feet of basal area per acre. And if anything you want to do above and beyond that with another species, go for it. So I don't think forestry is saying no. I try to find a solution of how the landowner can meet the requirements of the Forest Practices Act and still do what he or she wants to do. So that's what I've done, is I've suggested plant the minimum, so that to your check, you're gonna have to meet the requirement. And then anything you want to do above and beyond that, you want to put a different species in there, go for it.
And this is not pointing at Ashley.
What?
And that was not meant to be whining at Ashley. It was just, it was a curiosity that,
I don't think the Forest Practices Act is standing in the way. I think the landowner is subjective if they want to try something can't be met and still meet the requirements.
Thank you. So I think one thing I want to return to, Cheryl suggested a couple of policies out of the group for us to review. I think in this case, it might be useful for us to have a discussion about each of them, though obviously we don't have time for that tonight. I will note that by my count, there's really only like 20 of these because it goes 7 to 10. But still, we've got a lot of material to cover. I do want to sort of take a canvas of the folks on the committee and maybe the public as well before we wrap up, because we've got 20 minutes now, to see if there's any other items that we need to include for our next agenda, or things that we want to think about. I would encourage the group to read through the policies that are included in the county Goal 4, so that we have a good basis for discussion next time. I think that's a great way for us to approach this, because that's the part that we have sort of the most input and control over, in all likelihood, is the policy section. So let's try to dig into that and come with some opinions and thoughts about it next time. But with that, I might start with Jim. Do you have any thoughts about things that you'd like to bring up for the next meeting, or thoughts about the meeting today to close with?
I don't.
Okay. Fair
are we
enough.
getting into goal 5?
I fully intend that we'll have at least one more session on Goal 4, I think, and possibly two. It is the biggest part of our county and probably needs a lot of time. So I'm intending to continue 4, if the body is happy with that. Ron, do you have any thoughts or?
Actually, I was really lucky I had a jump start on this, and these guys were really good. When and where to build a house, and she shared the template. That was helpful. And to not only protect your house, but to protect the forest from your house. What was the other one? That carbon sink was very educational in how that works. I wish you had more time to explain all that. And
I think actually sorry to cut in a little bit. I think carbon and its interaction with forest practices might be an interesting thing for us to talk about as a policy or a goal. Obviously, that's a topic that really wasn't as hot when this was written, but I think that increasingly we're going to be dealing with it. So having some opinion about it might be a good thing, and discussion.
And that might operate outside of the Forest Practices Act, black box.
Yeah, or even though, as we've discussed, the areas where the county can have some interaction, or even to the extent that the county is a voice in revisions of the Forest Practices Act or lobbying thereof, that we might want to make a recommendation there.
I think the main thing was just educated how it all works together.
Yeah.
Well, and then back to Brady's thing, he was always managing your own property correctly, so that is a thing that you can do. It does affect the big picture as you go forward, even with small farms and whatnot. So,
Thank you, Ron.
Not long ago, the forest management practice of taking the worst, leaving the best, and you continuously have a better forest, you know, both as a state planner or whatever. And I guess I would love a refresher as far as what's the difference of your standing board feet in the forest as you get larger diameter logs. You know, it may not mesh with current economic practices, and yet it may. You know, on our tour, you could see all the little stumps, and then you could see the older ones that were bigger stumps, and you say, wow, I remember when we used to have those. And they're, you know, the forester there along with us had his little coring tool, and it used to be that as you get a bigger tree, you'd still have the big growth rings, but it was a bigger tree, so you had a hell of a lot more wood that was sequestering there. You weren't paying taxes on it because you weren't selling it, so it was like a savings account to the landowner. And it's just, you know, there's some thinking where I haven't caught up with what current thinking is on accumulating how many millions of board feet. You know, it doesn't run it through the Hampton Mill as it's growing out there. And, you know, so there's a conflict.
Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
other things we came up with, just, you know, generations from now, what is going to take the place of that? There's other stuff coming down the pike. People haven't even thought of yet.
Like, what are we talking about?
Wood,
Okay. In
lieu of
in
construction and whatnot.
And in Japan, they're kind of trying to do the opposite. Say, hey, wood you can build instead of concrete. You know,
Jim?
I'd like the group to think about that interface that I had brought up a little earlier, where we have zone changes in forestry, and another zone is just a good example. Agriculture will also be another example. But for instance, I know that there's been a county forest urban interface classification committee that had delivered a product a couple of years ago, 2015, 2016.
State level?
Yeah, it was part of, to classify what is different degrees or different productivity of forest lands. But also in 2017, another act was enacted, and this is where it gets a little fuzzy for me, is that it was to take the forest lands and identify what fire risk they are, and they had different categories and alike. And it was 2017, and a county can initiate that. And I don't know in this county, maybe somebody here in the audience, if that was ever enacted, and if it's actually enacted, where are they going? Because what I'm thinking is that with a classification of fire risk then on the forest lands, then we can couple it with possibly some additional guidance on the non-forest lands, the rural urban area, the rural areas, to fit in with what the recommendation is for the risk factor. So I'm looking at fire risk, for instance, as the concern is that this is slowly growing or maybe more rapidly growing in here, which was unheard of not that long ago, about being concerned in fire. So I'm thinking about, again, connecting across these zones.
Okay.
And so I'll just end it here.
Thank you. I guess a short question on that. Do you envision that as being included within a goal that we would say in the forestry section, that we would talk about the interaction between a risk section? Or would we be adding a sort of goal section at the end that would be about interactions?
No, this would actually be more, not in the forestry section, but would really be in another zone where that development is allowed.
Okay.
And maybe there are sufficient safeguards in place, defensible space, for instance, that we've heard that already. And there are some other types of activities that I feel we could explore if they don't exist now. That can be done in conjunction with the fire hazard map on the forest, because that's where traditionally, that's where the large fires will come from.
Okay, thank you. Pat?
So I guess my main concern was conversion of forest lands into something else, and so I brought up the question about what does the kind of the real estate investment trust corporate structure, does that necessarily incentivize that conversion behavior? And I guess I've learned today that it's not a particular threat for land conversion immediately, or maybe to the degree that I might have imagined, and so I think Julia gets off the hook for doing lots of work on the real estate investment trust form. I'm satisfied with what I learned today. That's all I had.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Approximately 80% of the county's acreage is timberland, far exceeding the state's overall 47%. 80% of our land is timber. It's appropriate that we spend a lot of time discussing this. And the sweet thing about democracy is that we get to have differing opinions. And I really value respectful discussion and disagreements and seeing and listening to respectfully two sides of an issue. I was very pleased to be able to go on the field trip this morning. I thought that was dynamite. I'm looking forward to the workshop on Monday. I think there will be differing sides presented to us there and an opportunity for us to learn.
Thank you. Todd?
A couple things. One is I'm concerned about the recreation goal, or part of our goal in the Forestry Practices Act. It seems when we drive around the county, every access to the forest has a gate across it. And I'd like to know practically why is that, and is it just a fear of litigation?
Dumping.
Yeah, what?
Dumping.
Or dumping or growing marijuana or something like that. It would seem to me that needs to be examined so that we can use the forest for recreation.
Okay.
Getting back to Jim's point about spread of fire, it occurs to me that, I don't know if this would make any sense at all, but clear cuts could be done in such a way that they would form a barrier for fire jumping. I was thinking like along ridge lines or that kind of thing. If we could work with the forest company, with the timber companies to manage the clear cuts so that they form boundaries around zones, which could then be protected from fire. And then one other thing I would like to hear discussed is the impact of, I don't know the right term, but I think continual selected harvesting versus clear cutting. I have a friend that's doing that on his land. It seems to be very productive, and you leave a forest standing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, sir. Robert?
Speechless?
Done.
Wow. What day is this notice?
Okay. Any further comment from the public? Yeah.
Brief comments. One, even though you don't have a direct impact on the Forest Practices Act, we certainly as a body write up some recommendations and concerns. And submit it. Email addresses around library and submit it to all the board members. Secondly, something I brought up one of the earlier meetings was, and it seems to be within the daily link of land uses,
Thank you. Any other comment from the public? Yes. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. We'll go in the back and then,
I would like to see us try to choose buildable land, farmland, and forest land based on soil types and slopes, not by zoning, because our zoning is way wacky a lot of the time. I would also like to see cluster homes or like little villages of small homes on small lots with shared wells and shared septics for people who live where I live out in the Coast Range and work out there too. They're loggers with the people who serve in the restaurants and gas stations and all the little places that are out there, the little motel even out there. That's what I'd like to see, soils.
That, her concept there of having little clusters like hamlets, I'm not talking about the place called Hamlet, but that Oregon state law allowed regional problem solving, outside the box thinking, you know, so yes, you could do it at Miles Crossing, yes, you could do it at Sunset Beach, yes, you could do it out in her place. You could do these little hamlets that don't currently fit in our scheme.
Were they grandfathered in? Is that why they?
No, but the whole concept of that it was a parallel land use process that the state allows you to do things that you're not allowed to do, but as a community process just like this. Regional, you know, she'll have a regional problem solving phase 2 at the Plains, and they would have talked about doing it at Sunset Beach, where you have a little intersection with a store and 2 or 3 story buildings living above a market. And, you know, it was allowable to think that way. So I'm saying back there in the back, you may be ahead of your time, behind your time, but you're not alone in your concept.
Ashley? Was it Ashley?
Available to answer your questions regarding the Forest Practices Act and what it does and may not do. And just, if you don't have my card, or I have one, and you can email me a quick question, and I'll get back to you within a day or so. And I'll attend these meetings just as a subject matter expert on the Forest Practices Act.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Without objection, we are adjourned.
3 minutes early.
Well, I guess not. We need.
Okay, we have objection.
We have an objection.
On the back of the
Staff has an objection.
Okay.
review meeting dates.
I would like you to take a look and review your meeting dates and times. You said you did want to meet again on the goal 4.
Yes,
and
certainly.
December is coming, so staff wanted to review with you very quickly. In order for staff to take all of the information that these committees and this committee, that all of you have been feeding to us over these 4 goals so far, staff needs a break from you. No offense.
Or offense.
We need January, February, and March. And so we would like you to get through goal 4 in December, because we need that time in January, February, and March to compile all of this and come back to you in April. Plus, I need to distribute to you your goal 5 materials, which are, goal 5 is a notebook unto itself. It is one notebook. So
That's
you
economic
each are getting it, and we're using trees, folks. We're using trees. So I need you to pick up your notebooks and get these background materials to you. And I need you to tell me when you're meeting again next, because it sounds like you're meeting in December.
Do we have any suggestions for a date in December to meet on?
What's our standard? We're usually the
Thursday, yeah. For me, I mean,
So
after the 11th, I'm gone.
So the 19th is the normal date. We've got 2 members who are of the Central Committee who are going to be gone, so it might be hard to get a quorum after. Is it the 11th for you as well, Pat?
Yes.
What's the
Okay.
second Thursday?
Second Thursday is the 12th. So that leaves us with the 5th, which is, do we have another event on the 5th even? Or is that a private thing in my head? The ag event, thank you. Let's try and do a doodle poll. Yeah.
You've got a few people missing, let's do a doodle poll. It might not be until Monday that you see that out, because we need to turn things around for you too. But you have your goal 4 materials, I'm gonna hand you goal 5, so it's really just let me get a doodle poll going for you, okay?
Okay, sure.
For the next meeting.
Is it possible to have a Skype or other kind of non-local? God, that sounds painful just to even say that, but
Some committees have done it.
call in or something.
Yes, it is possible to call in. You can make arrangements for that.
Thank you.
Cheryl.
And because we got ours at the CAC Northeast, she's kidding, she's not really giving you all of goal 5, she's giving you the first chunk. And the chunk is this big, there will be other chunks coming.
Is everything in there online?
Oh, the entire
Yeah.
comprehensive plan is online, and the community plans are online, yes. It is all online.
Limited bookshelf space. And actually, for the last 10 years, I've been sort of avoiding hard copies of stuff.
It is all online. You will be getting supplemental materials too.
Online.
Eventually, those will be online. They're not online right now because we are still compiling
Oh,
them.
I see.
So goal 5 is huge. Goal 5,
She's only giving you one chunk.
goal 5 is a very, very large goal. It covers an awful lot of ground. You're going to have work sessions on it. You'll have probably people from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. We will be touching on issues you've already talked about, wetlands, historic preservation, just, mining and quarrying is huge in goal 5. I mean, it's a big deal. So you've only got a section, you've got your first part, you've got goal 5 itself to get started with, and then you will be getting other supplemental materials. We do post everything online as soon as it's ready.
Sure.
The whole comprehensive plan currently is online.
Yep.
And is it in a prettied up form? Because I saw it on there, it's a comprehensive plan.
Oh, no, it's up.
It's the cut and paste, the copy.
It's up.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the adopted thing.
Cheryl, can you give me guidance on what's on the back of the agenda? What other items do we have?
So that was it. That's what I have. So I have notebooks for you.
Okay.
And then the doodle poll for your next. So that's it. That's not, now I'm done.
Okay, so without objection, we are adjourned? Okay, and everybody pick up your notebooks. To the members of the public, thank you for coming today. We appreciate your input and expertise, as always.
And members of the public, if you would be so kind as to sign in, and if you'd like to email address, be posted as to what's going on in the next meeting. You've got it.
My own?
Your own.
What if I do?
Underneath wheelbarrow parking before long.
I know, I said,
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate it.
Your,
Yeah, I appreciate your forbearance.
you probably are getting.
Yes, you do.